Hey, my name's William, and today we're going to be going over the ESP synthesizer that's included with Logic. So by now, at this point in the book, we should begin to recognize some of the parameters that we're seeing here. We should, be familiar with some of these. Obviously, there's some new ones here, some ones that we haven't gone over yet, but let's just jump right into it. I'm going to go over everything, and then we'll mess with it a little bit. So starting off on the left side, we have 4, 8, and 16, which again, it just essentially means the pitch. It changes the octaves. 4 being a higher pitch, 16 being a lower pitch. So right now, the sound we have, here, let me change it. Let me put it at the default setting. So right now, this is the bassy tone that we have. It's the default tone for this synthesizer when we open up the factory default preset. And if we change it to 8 or 16, it's much lower in frequency. Actually, 16 is so low that it begins to get a little hard to hear. So moving on, we're going to put it back at 4. So this now we have a bunch of faders. We have 6 faders here that are essentially levels for these different types of waves. So going through them, the first one is we have a triangle wave here, then we have a saw wave here, a square wave that has a -1, which means it's down an octave, and then a square wave that has a -2, which means it's down 2 octaves. And the last one we have is some noise, just a basic noise oscillator, excuse me. So right now, since we've already heard the tone, but we have a square wave that has a little bit of volume, a square wave that's down an octave that is at the same level, and then we have a square wave that's down 2 octaves that's all the way up, which is why it has that very bassy tone. Super bassy. So right off the bat, if we wanted to add some higher frequencies there, just so we can hear it easily, I'll turn up the triangle wave and the saw wave, since those are more sharper waves. They'll add some brighter harmonics to the sound. If we press a key now, we can already hear those bright tones from the saw and triangle waves in there. So I'll leave it like that as we're continuing on, so it's a little bit easier to hear that because of the tone. Moving on, though, we have now these 2 knobs are the LFO, which we've dealt with LFOs before. We've used them a little bit before. Like always, we have a speed knob, which determines how fast the LFO is. And then we have a knob that we haven't seen before. It's VIB and WAH. And what this means is if we had it set to VIB, that is essentially like setting the LFO as a vibrato to the notes. Whereas if we had it set to WAH or wah, it is acting as a modulator for the cutoff frequency over here, which we haven't gotten to yet. So to just show you really plainly, that's it set to the vibrato and adjusting the speed there. But if we set it to wah, you can see it has a much different effect. So I'm going to set that back to the default settings, and we'll move on. So now this big portion in the center here, this is actually just a cutoff filter. We've seen one of these before. This is the frequency that we're cutting off, this top knob up here, and this bottom knob is the resonance of that frequency that we're cutting off. One thing we haven't seen before, though, is this right here, this 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. Essentially what these are buttons that are going to control the filter modulation dependent on which key we press. So right now it's set to 3/3. So what's going to happen is right now I'm pressing a C note. If I go up, you can tell the filter is kind of moving with the note depending on the one I press. So we have a really low note here. And now if I press a higher note, the filter is going to move with that note because we have it set to 3/3. So we can still hear those high frequencies. It essentially follows whatever note you're moving. So if we press a C note and then we go up to a D note, it essentially is like moving the filter up a semitone as well. So that's a really cool thing to do, and you get some cool effects out of messing with the different versions of these. Moving on, we have the velocity filter and the ADSR intensity. So this velocity filter determines, it's essentially what it is the sensitivity to, or the depth, I should say, for the velocity. The higher the velocity filter knob is, the more dynamics we're gonna have, the greater dynamic range. So if I press a soft note and I press a loud note, there's gonna be some difference there. Whereas if we have it all the way down, there's gonna be no difference. That's soft now, and that's hard now. So it's relatively the same if we have it all the way down, whereas we have some dynamic range with the filter there. And then this is just the intensity of the ADSR. Moving on to the volume controls, we have a basic volume control where we control the output volume of the synthesizer, and then we also have a velocity volume, which is kind of like the velocity filter knob up here, except instead of the velocity being controlling the filter, it's controlling the volume. So since we have it all the way down, pressing a soft note and a hard note, it's relatively the same volume, even though the filter's changing because this is all the way up. The overall volume is relatively the same. Whereas if we turn this all the way up, a soft note is really quiet, whereas a harder note that I press is still relatively loud. So that's just dynamic range of volume there. And then moving on, we have a basic ADSR, attack, decay, sustain, release. We've seen this before, and actually each of the other synthesizers we've already covered. So you should be pretty familiar with this by now. And then last but not least, we have two built-in effects. We have a chorus effect and an overdrive. An overdrive, we've seen this before. It's just adds a grittiness to the sound, and then the chorus it like spreads out the sound and makes it have more voices. It's pretty cool how that sounds. So that's it for this synthesizer. That's it for the ESP. You should have recognized some of the stuff in this one. Obviously, all the different waves and the keyboard control with the filter cutoff is new. But other than that, you should have understood all of this fairly well. If you have any questions, read over some of your textbook. Definitely, as always, just mess with the synthesizers as much as you can. It's the best way to learn these. The more time you put in, the more you'll understand and the more you'll get out of these. So again, thanks for watching. See you next time.